Okay. Thank you, Professor Chambless, for being with us. Tim is a professor at the University of Utah in the Political Science Department, and we are very lucky to have him here. So I've asked him to talk about three things, or three segments. One is how we got the Electoral College, how it works, and what we might do to get rid of it. And I will note that the League of Women Voters has had a position since 1970 opposing the Electoral College, wanting to abolish it and go to a direct popular vote. Tim, you've got a half an hour, and then we'll turn it on to discussion. Take it away.
Jill, thank you very much. Happy to speak to you today. The Electoral College. Think of it as a part of the Constitutional Convention, 1787, May to September, 4 months. And it's a part of our experiment in democracy. It's what George Washington said at the Constitutional Convention as presiding officer. What we are creating here is an experiment in democracy. And we talk about a convention, we're really talking about ultimately 41 individuals, a large committee. That's what we're talking about. Alexander Hamilton being the only representative for the entire state of New York, 12 states, not 13 that attended. And the Electoral College is a compromise. James Madison said, as the father of the Constitution, what we must do here is compromise, compromise, compromise without feeling compromised. Well, the Electoral College is a compromise. Why do we have it? Why was it created first? And then why do we still struggle with it today? And I can fully understand why the League of Women Voters for the last half century since 1970 has been opposed to it, because essentially it's undemocratic. But it was created. Why was it created? Well, again, it's a compromise. First, to southern states. Southern states, which were in a minority at the Constitutional Convention in terms of population, if you did not count those who were held in bondage, slaves. And the first matter that was opened, that was considered after they had a quorum, closed the doors and closed the windows so they could talk, the first issue was doing away with slavery. And the southern states said, we will walk, we're out of here if you're going to persist in this proposal. And because the leadership, all older white men of property and fairly wealthy, said we have to come up with a document to replace the first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and that's going to be this so-called second U.S. Constitution. Then we will have aspects to it that maybe we'll have to tolerate. For example, the 3/5 compromise, the computation that southern states, for the purpose of representation in the U.S. House of Representatives, they're going to have the formula of 5 black men equaling 3 white men for the purpose of representation. Notice women are not included, and neither are Native Americans. Well, we get rid of the 3/5 compromise as a result of the Civil War, but the Electoral College, which is a companion to it, we still have today. And the Electoral College is kind of a check upon the fear that uneducated, ignorant, if you will, the phrase used, of government might somehow run amok. And so electors who were knowledgeable and educated could be a check on the ignorant masses. That is a second aspect to slavery. And why even this consideration? Is because remember, 1787 is just months before 1789 and the revolution in France, in which those folks in power are going to literally be losing their heads. And there were a lot of folks who were fearful that that could happen in America. After all, we had just gone through a very divisive 8-year war with England, and England was also thinking about coming back in and invading the country again, and it will happen. 30 years later, War of 1812. So what happens is we have the Electoral College, and we did not get rid of it during the Civil War. We should have. We've considered it several times in our history of modifying it in some way. We still have it as it was presented Most recently, I think in 2000, 2001, there was a committee hearing. Before then, there were some serious hearings in 1968, but we still have the Electoral College. Shifting. How do you compute it? Well, we've gone from 65 electoral votes in 1788 to 538 electoral votes based upon not 13 states, but 50 states since 1959, 50 states plus the District of Columbia. So the electoral vote is at 538. And the formula rests upon each state has at least 2 electoral votes because each state has, through the Great Compromise, 2 senators. And then a state has at least 1 electoral vote depending upon the population size. And that comes down to today. We have 7 states out of our 50 states, regardless of the size of geography, that have the constitutional minimum of 1. That includes Alaska and Wyoming and Montana and North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, and Delaware, Joe Biden's home state. Delaware being one of the original 13 states. Then in contrast, we have California. And California has 55 electoral votes, 2 senators plus 53 House members. And together 55 electoral votes. That's 1/10 of the country's population. And California is a powerful state, would be probably the 5th wealthiest country in the world if it were a nation. So those are the numbers that we have. And we look at today, to have a majority vote in the Electoral College, you have to have 270. You know this, and you know that the outcome right now is 306 votes electoral for Joe Biden, 232 for the current occupant of the White House. The popular vote, which to me is so much more important, but it is not the sovereign decision. It has Joe Biden right now at about 1.5, almost 6.2 million more votes than the current occupant of the White House, scheduled to leave on January 20th. 5 times in our history, and also Joe Biden is coming up on 80 million popular votes. The Republicans, 74 million votes. That's a lot of votes. We've never had so many people vote, both for the winning candidate and the losing candidate in our presidential elections. And we're still counting the votes. We're at 98% reporting. There are still rural villages in Alaska to be counted. Usually it takes about a month for Alaska to fully report, but they should be finished by December 8th. And California and New York are still counting. Anyway, a little more, almost 99% popular vote reporting. And we're seeing that a record voter turnout. And when we go to Q&A, we can talk about certain states like Wisconsin and Michigan and others. But Joe Biden has apparently won the election on both the electoral vote and the popular vote. I get emails from friends around the world who said to me, Tim, explain this to me, American democracy. How come the person who doesn't get the most popular votes, doesn't win the election? 5 times out of 45 times, the person who did not get the most popular votes did not win the election. Hillary Clinton with 2.9 million votes 4 years ago. Al Gore, 500,000 more votes 20 years ago. 4 out of 5 times, the winning candidates have been Republicans out of our history, the last 4 out of 5 times. So this points out that governing is not easy. Governing is hard. We've been trying to get it right about how to conduct elections ever since the beginning of our experiment in democracy. And just to repeat, since the Constitutional Convention, a few people were left out. Ruth Bader Ginsburg points this out very clearly, that women, about half the population, left out until 1920. In terms of years, women have been denied the right to vote in this country longer than they've had the right to vote. It's been 100 years now, since 1920, voting for president, the 19th Amendment. Now, back after the Civil War, 5 years after the Civil War, 1870, white men gave black men the right to vote through the constitutional process of the constitutional amendment, the 15th Amendment. But again, women, regardless of color, left out. Native Americans, who were here first, did not get the right to vote until 1924, and that was done not by constitutional amendment, but by actually an act of Congress giving them immediate citizenship and the right to vote immediately. So I see some problems here. And I usually think in terms of problem solution, cause and effect, problem solution. We have some problems. Why aren't we inclusive? Why is it that we have over the years had voter suppression? Why is it that, for example, African Americans after the Civil War informally still suffered forms of economic slavery, if not electoral slavery, not being able to have the freedom that I think everybody here on the screen has had until the 1960s, with the 1964, 65, 68 Civil Rights Acts. And I go back to that 1965, August 6th, 1965 Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. Maybe we can talk about that in more detail. But having talked about history, having talked about the procedures, now let's move to that third step, and that is options. And historically, we've had 7 articles in our original Constitution. We've had 27 amendments, the first 10 being the Bill of Rights. And the last amendment, the 27th Amendment, being back during the Vietnam War, lowering the age of it to vote to age 18 from 21. And that's in 1971. So since then, we have not had a new constitutional amendment, but would you believe we've had over 11,000 proposed constitutional amendments? It's difficult, very difficult to enact a constitutional amendment. Being approved by the House and Senate in uniform, identical form, 2/3 vote, then to the legislatures, we have 50 states. So 3/4 being 38 legislatures, it's very difficult. If you know something about the Equal Rights Amendment, its history for over 100 years, how difficult it is to get a constitutional amendment. Yet, we've done it a couple times. In the 18th Amendment, prohibition. And with prohibition in 1920, the noble experiment that failed, 13 years later, 1933, we get the 21st Amendment that erases the 18th Amendment. So that's something we could consider. We could also talk about the worst Supreme Court case probably in our history that basically said slavery was legal and could be spread anywhere in the territories. And what eliminated that idea was the 13th Amendment, passed 8 months after the end of the Civil War. But again, constitutional amendments are really, really difficult to enact. So a second way to maybe deal with the Electoral College, if you perceive, as I do, that it's undemocratic, that it's exclusive rather than inclusive, is to maybe think about chipping away at it, like the state of Maine and the state of Nebraska. The state of Maine in 1972 and the state of Nebraska in 1992, through its state legislatures, changed the law with regard to the Electoral College vote. Now, they're rural states. Maine, total of 4 electoral votes, 2 senators, 2 House members. Nebraska, 5 electoral votes, 2 senators, 3 House members. Both of those states, when votes are counted, and if the electoral vote for that individual congressional district in Maine or Nebraska is awarded to the winning candidate. So, for example, 4 years ago, the Republican lost the state of Maine. More people voted for Hillary Clinton than voted for the Republican. Along the more populated coastline of Maine, the 1st congressional district, that vote went for Hillary Clinton. But the more rural, more forested, more wooded, and high unemployment area, the 2nd congressional district barely voted for the Republicans. So therefore, in 2016, Maine awarded 3 electoral votes out of 4 to Hillary Clinton, and 1 went to the Republican candidate. This time around, once again, that 2nd congressional district race in Maine has gone to the Republican twice in 2 elections. Over in Nebraska, one of the districts is drawn around the population centers of Omaha and Lincoln, Nebraska, and that has been awarded to Joe Biden. So a split electoral vote, chipping away at that winner-take-all system that we have. And by the way, we have it not just in our voting for president, but I played basketball, and teams can be tied at the end of regulation, and after the first overtime and the second overtime, go to a third overtime, and eventually one team wins by a point. And guess what? The team that wins by a point gets 1 victory. The team that lost by 1 point in triple overtime, nothing. Winner take all. That's basically the system we have. Again, I think it's fairly undemocratic. Utah goes 60-40, 3-2 for the Republican candidate. Democrats get no electoral votes out of, say, 6 that Utah has today. California, 55 electoral votes. The winner to the Democrat, all 55. The Republican, who maybe gets, about a third. Basically, it's 2-1. California is very Democratic now. And the Republicans get not a single vote at all. Again, I consider that to be undemocratic. Well, constitutional amendment, one option. Second, chip away at it with regard to congressional voter turnout. The third is a unique proposal called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And we can talk about that just briefly before going into Q&A. We've had 15 states out of our 15, about almost a third of our states, plus the District of Columbia, approve this proposal, state legislative proposal, so that these states agree that regardless of how the vote occurred in their own state, if a majority of the country has approved of a particular voter, a candidate for president, for example, Joe Biden this year, then the states award their electoral votes to that winning candidate. Again, it's a proposal. It's been approved by 15 states in the District of Columbia. It is not law. Right now, those 15 states in the District of Columbia represent 196 electoral votes, which means if you subtract 196 from 270, there's about 74 votes approximately that need to be awarded from states that right now have been reluctant, like Utah, reluctant to accept this idea of a national popular vote interstate compact proposal. But having said that, we have another problem, and it's the demographics. Would you believe that of our 50 states, if 11 states vote in a certain way, 11 certain states vote a certain way, they would award the 270 votes needed for election, and 39 states, more rural states, country states, would lose out. That's because in our country, people are free to live where they want, move where they want, live where they want, and hopefully vote where they want. And so we have a situation where the most populous states could very well outnumber the more rural states. How to change that? Not sure, unless we do some pretty serious governmental engineering, like telling people where to live and so forth. So that's another consideration as well. Again, 538 electoral votes. My own view is that it was a mistake at the outset in 1787. It was a result of a compromise in order to keep the southern states from leaving. The importance of being able to get consensus. Actually, the vote to approve the Constitution was a vote of 38-3. So that was achieved. But we have been saddled with this process that 5 times has given us presidents that did not earn the majority of America's popular votes. And therefore, that individual, the last 4 being members of the Republican Party, have been, in a sense been minority presidents. It points out how divided the country has been as a result of that election. And we see it in the last 4 years that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes, but the Republican got the electoral vote by 306 votes, which he called a landslide back then. This time around, he is disputing the 306 electoral vote victory, even up to this nanosecond. So voting, counting the votes, how we vote, ongoing controversy. So this subject of the Electoral College is very timely today, a couple of days before Thanksgiving. Let us hope that we can give thanks for not only for good health, but also for our experiment in democracy working well, so that the people's will, this time with regard to the popular vote and the electoral vote, are recognized and respected, and we can go forth and bring the country hopefully back together. So am I within time?
Tim, you've got a couple more minutes. Could you walk us through the Electoral College steps as it happens from today till Inauguration Day?
Well, okay, we can do that in terms of, in fact, if we go back, first off, we're in Utah, so case study, Utah. Back on June 30th was a primary system, and as part of the primary elections, electors were selected in Utah. Utah has 6 electoral votes. So 2 senators, 4 House members. And as a result, each party chose certain individuals who would serve as electors if their candidate was elected. Well, the Republican Party won. Utah has not voted for a Democrat since Lyndon Johnson in 1964. So individuals like Sean Reyes, the Attorney General, just recently reelected, is one of the Republican electors scheduled to vote formally on December 14th. But also, if you remember, Greg Hughes, candidate for governor, Greg Hughes, Speaker of the House, and he's one of the Republican electors as well. Now, the Republican Party's won. Today is November 24th. On December 8th, states basically have to confirm that their electors are indeed the ones who will be representing the state, when 6 days later, on December 14th, electors in each state will vote. And under Utah law, electors are to vote for the Republican Party in this case. If elector decides that he or she, in this case, I just mentioned a couple of he's, who will not or have problems voting for the individual that the voters selected, that person will be automatically replaced by the state elections officer, the lieutenant governor, who also has the responsibilities of Secretary of State, a fellow named Spencer Cox, who I believe is going to be the next governor of the state. So it's interesting how individuals can have a number of roles, even though supposedly only one office, they can have a number of roles. I'll give you a personal incident. Go back to 1996 in Utah. I had a camera crew from Channel 7 up at the state capitol to record the electoral vote for Utah, because I was teaching a class called The Constitution that was seen on statewide Channel 9 TV. And one of the electors was a fellow named Chris Cannon. You may remember Chris Cannon. He was going to be Congressman Chris Cannon. He had defeated Jim, one now, I'm spacing, Bill, why am I forgetting? 3rd District, Bill Orton. And forgive my senior moment. And Chris Cannon was still a private citizen. He was not yet a government official. He would qualify to be an elector, and he'd been designated by the Republican Party to be one. But out loud, talking to me with the camera rolling, he said he had real problems as a Republican voting for Bob Dole, who in 1996 had been the Republican nominee and had lost to Bill Clinton, I think a vote of something like 49-41. And then you had Ross Perot taking the third party votes. And so Lieutenant Governor at that time heard him say that out loud. And she came up to him and said, if you are going to do that, I'm going to replace you immediately with one of our other representatives who can serve as a substitute and vote and exercise the people's will. And Chris Cannon kind of got a red blush to his face and kind of muttered, and he said, okay, I'll vote for Dole, even though he's not conservative enough for me, whatever that means. That was 1996, okay? Here we are now in 2020, and the person who won Utah's electoral votes in 2016 has done so again. So Utah's 6 electoral votes chosen by the Republican Party at the June 30th primary will be voting on December 14th for all 6 for the winning candidate. And then after the new year, January 6th, in Washington, D.C., the House and Senate in joint session will vote, and each individual will, each state will announce their vote. Now, you may remember 20 years ago, there was and the vote count is articulated in this joint session by the sitting vice president, a fellow named 20 years ago, a fellow named Al Gore Jr. So we had this amazing moment when Al Gore Jr., the vice president, outgoing, had to announce that the losing candidate to the new president, George W. Bush, was Al Gore Jr. That was kind of high drama. And so that's part of our experiment in democracy as well, in our open society. And then, of course, ultimately on January 20th, that's its scheduled inauguration day. And I should point out that January 20th is the date by constitutional amendment, 20th Amendment, that replaced what is stated in the Constitution under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, the executive article, in which March 4th is the date specified in the original Constitution. The thinking then was that the country was small, agricultural, agrarian. We didn't have an interstate highway system. In fact, the fastest way to get from one state to another was by boat and not by overland. No roads. Also, there were those guys you might call highwaymen that might be waiting out there for you. And so March 4th, 4 months, a third of the year was the time from when an election would take place to when the new president would take office. Well, we got a little problem when Abraham Lincoln was elected in November and couldn't take office until March 4th. By the time he came to office 4 months later, 7 states had left the Union, and we were facing a potential civil war, or war between the states, or what my father in rural Texas used to say, the war of northern aggression, which raises other issues that we could talk about. So anyway, those are the dates that we talk about right now. November 3rd, okay, December 8th, December 14th, January 6th, January 20th. And as of today, right now, at this very moment, a woman named Linda Thomas Greenfield is speaking from Wilmington, Delaware, and she is the person that will represent the United States as UN ambassador, nominee to be the UN ambassador, given her confirmation by the Senate shortly after January 6th. And again, you might say United Nations, that concept, 1945, that's a long time after 1787. So it points out we are continually reinventing ourselves. What George Washington said was so true. What we are creating here is an experiment in democracy. But before we can govern, we have to get ourselves elected. We have to make the system work.
Tim, fabulous. We have tons of questions coming into that chat box.
Great.
We have.
Can you read those to me? I
I
don't have
will.
glasses on, and I need a magnifying glass for my chat box here.
No worries. We've got so many that you'll need to keep moving through these, okay? I'm going to go right down the way they came, and then we'll start just putting our hands up, all right? The first one was from Robin Froge. Who was the Democrat who lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College vote?
Okay, 1824. In 1824, we basically had, after the War of 1812, the Federalist Party disappeared and the Whig Party had not yet emerged. The Republican Party had not yet emerged. Everybody was basically calling themselves a Democratic Republican. And there were 4 candidates for president that year. And none of them got a majority of the electoral vote. Andrew Jackson, war hero from the War of 1812, his supporters had won the House and Senate, but he himself had not won majority of the popular vote or the electoral vote, but he had the lead. And so as a result, John Quincy Adams, who was better known to the electors, remember his father was John Adams, and Henry Clay, who finished third behind John Quincy Adams and then Andrew Jackson. Henry Clay said, I'll throw my support to John Quincy Adams. As a result, when the election went to the House of Representatives, the only time this, the House of Representatives, that what happened was that John Quincy Adams was elected, even though he had not gotten a majority of the electoral vote. And he also appointed as his Secretary of State a fellow named Henry Clay, who then will run for president 2 more times. So this is a real combustible example of our experiment in democracy. And I'll just leave that. During the campaign, twice, Jackson had duels in which he shot and killed people that he felt had offended the memory of his wife, who had died during the campaign.
Okay, here's one from Chris Cherniak. Are there other states considering the Maine, Nebraska model of chipping away at the Electoral College?
Yes, bills are introduced, but that doesn't mean they necessarily get a hearing. Doesn't necessarily mean that they get a floor vote in either the House or Senate. Nebraska, a little bit easier, because interestingly enough, Nebraska is the only state that's a unicameral, not bicameral, one house. Arguably more efficient, but the other 49 states, like Utah, have kind of a check and balance system between the House and Senate, modeled upon the national legislature, which is the Congress. So yes, bills are introduced, but very often they don't go anywhere.
Do you see any state that might actually do that? Have you?
Well, I think we see purple states. We see states that may very well be changing. Look at Georgia, for example, right now. My home state of Texas, right now. We'll see, but right now I don't see the equivalent of 74 electoral votes in states. That seismic shift. Could it happen? I hope it does, because I believe that in inclusion rather than exclusion.
Okay. This one's from Kathy Biele. I was in a meeting yesterday in which the speaker tried to explain battleground states. She said we don't pay attention to California, for instance, because everyone knows how it will vote. So the swing states voted are unclear. Much about that. Is that correct? And what would happen in Michigan if the electors had split 2 to 2? So there are 2 questions there.
Well, keep in mind that we have 50 states in the District of Columbia. So in a presidential election, we're really talking about 51 elections, 51 elections. And then the way our country is divided up, each state is county by county. Utah has 29 counties. And so we have 29 county clerks that count the votes in each county. I forget exactly how many counties there are, say, in Michigan. Michigan is a state that has historically been what's called a Rust Belt state, upper Midwest state, industrial, um, and had voted historically since the Depression and after World War II, voted Democratic. What happened in 2016 was a historical aberration. It was a surprise. I'm sure it was a surprise to Hillary Clinton because she basically didn't campaign there, and campaign kind of overlooked, more assumed that Michigan would vote Democratic. But Michigan is a diverse state. There's a big difference between Wayne County, Detroit, and say the upper areas of Michigan. Also, Michigan has a board of, it's even number, not odd number, of 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And that's where it's gotten attention, to confirm the votes reported from each of the counties. And one of the 2 Republicans indicated early on that he was hearing loud and clear the concerns expressed by the current occupant of the White House, and that he was not going to vote to confirm the total vote count from all the counties in Michigan until all litigation had ended. And that might very well conflict with the dates that we talked about earlier, especially if there were maybe an appeal to the US Supreme Court. Does anybody remember Bush versus Gore? 36 days back in 2000, the year 2000. Unprecedented case, one that the Supreme Court hopes that it'll never have to deal with again, when a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court, the only court specified in Article 3 of the Constitution, chose the leader of the country on a 5-4 vote in Article 2 of the Constitution. That's a real experiment in democracy. Ultimately, what happened yesterday was that the individual who said he wasn't going to vote ended up not voting at all. And the other Republican voted to affirm. So the final vote count of this supervisory board is 3-0 to 1, 1 abstention. And keep in mind, in the state of Michigan, that board doesn't have sovereignty. It's basically a board that just gives approval to the fact that all the votes have been reported from each of the counties. Once that's done, then if folks want to go back and appeal, if it's within a certain margin of error, or litigate, they can. But otherwise, that board that voted 3-0 to 1 yesterday was basically a supervising board. It got a lot of attention because it's unprecedented to get such controversy. But Michigan was a vote that had barely voted for the Republican 4 years ago. This time, 150,000 vote margin for the Democrat.
So we're lucky that it wasn't a 2-2 vote.
If it had been 2-2, chances are we would be in the courts.
Yeah, okay.
Because in our history, going back to 1835, de Tocqueville observed in his great book, Democracy in America, that Americans, when they are upset about any type of public policy issue, they go to court. And that also is apparent in the fact that we have today about 70% of all the lawyers in the world. We have a population of 5% of the population of the world. We're the 3rd most populous state, but we have 70% of all the lawyers.
Okay, got another one here from Mary Wright. Would it be our Utah State Legislature who would consider whether Utah would join the National Popular Vote Compact, or maybe could it be put on the ballot as a referendum in the next election?
Good question. At first, it's the legislature. Okay. At first, it's the legislature. That's what the Constitution says in terms of giving power to the legislature. That's why, for example, remember Proposition 4, 2 years ago, Better Boundaries, Anti-Gerrymandering Commission. It was approved by the voters by about 52%. I think you all remember that. And yet the legislature points out very quickly that the Utah State Constitution specifies that the legislature, not an outside body, makes decisions with regard to, say, drawing of districts, House and Senate. The voters approved an advisory commission back in 2018, and immediately the legislature didn't like that and wanted actually to erase it, like it basically had done with Propositions 2 and 3. And I can go into great detail about this in the weeds just because I'm president of the board. And Gigi knows a lot about what we were dealing with. And but long story short, the legislature in 2000 this year passed Senate Bill 200, I think unanimously out of the Senate, and one vote opposition in the Utah House to approve this anti-gerrymandering petition. Okay, Proposition 4, okay, but significantly altered from what the voters had proposed. Utah has a history of making it very difficult to approve propositions. This last time around, 2018, we had 3 propositions on the ballot. I think you have to go back almost to 1960 to see 3 additional propositions on the ballot. I may be wrong on my exact year. Utah makes it very difficult to qualify to have a proposition on the ballot for the people who express their will. In contrast to California, where you can have over 100 propositions on the state ballot. Of course, California is a huge state. One proposition in California that did not qualify was, if the voters had had a chance to vote on it, was to divide California 3 ways. Just like North Dakota and South Dakota, North Carolina and South Carolina, you could have had Northern California, Southern California, and something like the middle of California. That's how large California is. But that ballot measure did not make it on.
So we could do it by a ballot measure. The legislature might do what they want.
I want to say could, but emphasize in capital letters could, given our history of opposition, difficulty, and also the fact that it's unprecedented. I don't have a precedent. I can't point to a year when we did it before.
Mm-hmm.
Jill, let me point out Derek Kitchen's post at the end where he put up his proposed legislation for the NPV.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I appreciate that.
Derek, see you.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
Doing well.
Thanks for the lecture. I love learning from you.
I consider it a discussion rather than a lecture.
Well, okay. I guess I'll just highlight really quickly, not to detract from what you're saying. I did drop in the chat box here a protected draft of my legislation for the upcoming general session, which begins on January 19th. So I haven't yet made this public, so please keep it to yourself, but you're welcome to open that document, review it, and provide any feedback if you'd like. I'm working with organizers and constituents, both Republican, unaffiliated, and Democratic, to build support around this initiative, this popular vote legislation that will modify the state election code to enter the state into the National Popular Vote Compact. Whether or not, it is a priority legislation of mine this session. It's one of my 3 priority bills that I've already designated, but there's a chance it doesn't go anywhere. I will say in the past, past 13 years, there have been 7 pieces of legislation introduced into the Utah legislature, all seeking to address the national popular vote in one form or another. All of them have been introduced by Republicans. So I think that there's definitely interest on that side, which maybe we try to figure out how we can find common ground on something like this. I think that there's real interest. But I like the conversation about a ballot initiative in the year 2022. I think it's something that we should be talking about and maybe doing some preliminary organizing. Tim is right. It's really hard to get an initiative on the ballot. We'll need to gather roughly 120,000 signatures statewide. So it is a bit of a a monumental lift in volunteer hours and labor, but it's definitely doable. So it's something we should keep, the conversation is something we should keep alive.
Derek?
Senator Kitchen,
Yeah.
a question, just to confirm, what your bill would do would have the election code changed so that we would go with a popular vote. It's not to join the Interstate National Popular Vote Compact, correct?
That's not the intention. What it would do is it would change the election code to dictate that Utah would direct all of our electoral votes to the candidate that captures the national popular vote.
Okay, period. It would not be to join the compact. It would be to just do it.
So again, this is a protected draft. I haven't made it public. I've been working on it back and forth with my drafting attorney. At this moment, the intention is not necessarily to join the compact as it's drafted, which I have somewhere here in my files, but I'm open to modification to the bill. So if anybody on here has a policy mind and is interested in combing through that proposed legislation and then giving me feedback, I'm receptive and would be open to having a dialogue one-on-one or in a smaller group setting if you'd like.
Derek, may I ask, the Republicans who have introduced legislation, were they in leadership?
Ooh, at the moment of introduction, I don't know.
No.
Well, for instance, in the Senate, Howard Stevenson introduced the bill in 2012. I'm just looking at my notes really quick. I think he's the biggest name. Steve Urquhart as well, also introduced in 2011. All the other bills were introduced in the House, and I'm less familiar with those former members of the House.
I ask because my perception is if a bill is introduced and supported by leadership, usually it gets through committee, it gets a floor vote, and very often it gets passed. Now, Urquhart was kind of an outlier within the Republican Party. And I think since then he wouldn't identify with the Republican Party. Stevenson, a power, but also, if I remember right, was never in leadership. And the reason why I pointed out is if a bill has the support of leadership in the Utah State Legislature, chances are it's going to pass. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened so far. I have hopes for your bill. Good luck.
Thank you, sir. I'm nurturing a few relationships in the majority caucus, so we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Good, good.
Another question was, which states do you think will gain or lose Electoral College votes, meaning representations in Congress?
It's a good question. Looking at the demographic shifts, we see that a state like Florida, if you predict the future off the past, 10 years ago, Florida picked up 2 electoral votes. New York lost 2 electoral votes. I think there's something to be said for snowbirds leaving New York and heading for Florida. Texas, I think, has 38 electoral votes, my home state. I think that you could see Texas picking up at least 1, maybe 2. Now, keep in mind, it's a zero-sum game in a sense, winner take all. So if Texas were to pick up an electoral vote, if Florida were to pick up 1, maybe California, although California has been fairly stable, then states have to lose. And what we've seen is demographically, people have been moving away from the industrial Northeast and the upper Midwest and moving down to the Sun Belt states of the South and out to the Rocky Mountain West. So not that it's going to happen this time, but I remember when Utah had only 2 House members, and then 3, then 4, but I don't think it's going to happen this time around.
Okay, we're getting pretty close to the end here, but here's another one. Do you think that getting rid of the Electoral College in whatever way is possible in the near future, or how long is this going to take?
Boy, crystal ball question deserves a crystal ball answer. Okay, I think that we should be relentless, but in the immediate future, for say the next decade, before the next census, I would be I don't gamble, but if I were to gamble, I would say it's probably not going to happen in the next 10 years. But given our demographic shifts, that the estimate that by the year 2042, if not sooner, people that look like me will be a minority, that maybe what we'll see is that in terms of the dynamics of states, that we will see more states becoming purple and maybe deciding that it's time for a major change in how we elect our leaders. So maybe after the census of 2030 or 2040 or even 2050, we could hopefully think of the Electoral College as being antiquated and outdated, undemocratic, and time to change to the direct vote of the people, the popular vote. I have to be an optimist.
Okay.
I hope to be around to see that change, by the way.
Yeah. You have answered a number of the questions that have come off that I'm not going to read to you. So let's take about 2 more questions really quickly. Just a raise of hands if somebody has a question. Let's hear it. Mary, unmute your mic.
There. I was wondering if there's any move, now I've forgotten my question. Oh, to move up the date of the inauguration, because it seems a long period of time to have a president that can do some damage before he leaves.
Very important question. My father used to say the best way to avoid a problem is by not creating it. We created it after the American Revolutionary War when we wanted a democracy, small d, but we didn't want to be like England. We just fought an 8-year war with England. So we don't want a parliamentary democracy. We're going to put our protections down in writing a constitutional democracy. And so as a result, again, as I mentioned earlier, under Article 2 of the Constitution, March 4th was the date set. And then we decided, better change that. Let's bring it up to January 20th. Indeed, we have a current occupant of the White House who every day can do great damages to our experiment in democracy. So it would stand to reason of moving that date up. You know, it's called the interregnum period of time from the election in November to the change of peaceful transfer of power in late January. It would stand to reason, given the technology we have today, the population demands we have today, that we move that date up from January 20th to say, you know, in the same calendar year as the election. It doesn't have to be November 4th after election day on November 3rd. Remember in England, when there are other parliamentary democracies, the majority of democracies, vast majority of democracies were parliamentary, that the election takes place, immediately there's a change of power, the leader of the winning party becomes the prime minister or the president. And we don't have that. Maybe we should have it because this is a dangerous world. And what happens if you have a defeated, depressed president in denial who wants to stay in power? Maybe it stands to reason that it might be time to expedite the process of changing the leadership. So it's a very good question.
Yeah, Judy Horwitz.
Okay, I have 2 questions. I have a follow-up on the last question. There does seem to, well, we're hoping that Trump is an anomaly because it's never happened before. But does there need to be some time for a transfer of power, just like they do the FBI background checks, and to get the new team up to have some information? I mean, I don't think we've ever had a president who has been destructive like this. I mean, it's just staggering. What do you think about that in terms of doing it immediately without having a little time for transition?
Okay. The closest we have is the 25th Amendment, which became law 3 years, 3 months after John Kennedy's death. And there are 4 sections to it. And the last section deals with the matter of a president who is incapable, unable to govern.
Right.
He's still alive. He's not dead, but he has caused his He's caused such concern that the Congress and the cabinet will come together, and there's a procedure you can read in the section 4 of the 25th Amendment, but it says that we will temporarily take the powers of president away from the president, temporarily to the vice president, until such time that maybe the current president, sitting president, is stable and can govern again. Now that can be in the eye of the beholder, but right now I would say to you, we have a current president defeated, in denial, probably depressed, who is desperate to remain in office because he's got subpoenas and litigation awaiting him as a private citizen. He can potentially be a national security threat. I believe he certainly is a national security threat. Again, in our political history of 231 years, we've never had anything like this before. And it's been happening, not just in slow motion, but on a daily basis.
Well, we're hoping that maybe the Republicans will catch on with the military, because everybody is terrified about that.
Well, look at the ambivalence we have in Utah. We have Mike Lee. Look at today's Salt Lake Tribune. And then look at Mitt Romney, who has a greater understanding and appreciation of the process and how vulnerable democracies are, and the process of becoming president. Remember, he ran for president 6.5 years. Second, the Republican Party in 2008, the nominee in 2012. And I don't rule out the possibility that third time's the charm, that in 2024, at the young age of 77.5, he might do it again. The difference in Utah between Mitt Romney and Mike Lee is really significant.
Okay, I have one other question, and that is, are there any states where the electors for the Electoral College, can they vote on their own? And if there aren't, then why do they go through this whole enactment of a vote? Why wouldn't it just be automatic?
We go back to our history, that the election in 1 month, the electors, it takes a while to physically travel to the nation's capital way back when. With the technology that we've had since in recent decades, you can be in your own state capital on a designated date to then basically teleconference, phone it in. But it comes down to tradition. Electoral College is tradition. See, I wish we could have gotten rid of it just like the 3/5 compromise, but it took a civil war, that national trauma, to get rid of the 3/5 compromise. Look at the traumas we've gone through to finally give women the vote, to give African Americans equal status and the vote in this country. This country has wonderful potential, but George Washington was right. What we are creating here is an experiment in democracy. We're trying to make it work continually.
Thank you.
Yes, this has been fabulous. Let me say one thing before we close out here. It is noon. Kathy Biele put in the chat that the League of Women Voters website, which is lwvutah.org, has a complete history of voting in the United States. That would be a good reference. Tim, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and being on here. We'll watch what happens.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be invited. Thank you all. Thank you for what you do. Please stay safe and healthy. Please. Bye-bye now.